Welcome to Overwhelmed to Overcomer podcast with coach, encourager, and strategist Anna McLaughlin. If you're a Christian woman who has big dreams rooted in an even bigger God, but most days those dreams feel completely out of reach, trust me, I get it. As a homeschooling mama of four, entrepreneur, investor, and all around wearer of many hats, I am right there with you. And yet, the Lord invites us to live out our God given purpose now in the midst of the madness. So, let's explore together how we can know our calling and walk in it today with clarity, with courage, with each other. It's time for you to live the life you love and love the life you live. Let's do this thing. Welcome to this episode of Overwhelmed to Overcomer. I've got a treat for you. I have a treat for you. I have here a guest, Lauren Black, who is going to teach us how to make decisions from a godly framework. Lauren, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm going to tell you just a snippet about Lauren, and then we're going to really get to the meat of this conversation. So, Lauren is the world's biggest overthinker turned decision coach. I might fight you on the overthinker thing. I might win the award on that too. All by the grace of God. After years of struggling with indecision and failing to find an effective decision making system, Lauren drew on her experience as a brand strategist to craft her decision making framework, the SAIL method. Her process is rooted in integrating your personality, preferences, passions, and priorities, all wrapped in prayer. Lauren's framework is the cornerstone of her one to one decision coaching, strategic decision guides, and podcast, The Anchored Decisions Show. Lauren's mission is clear: empowering Christian women to make confident decisions, take decisive action, and live with purpose. Hello, we all need this. Okay, so Lauren, how did this all begin? Where did you talked about struggling with indecision and failing to find an effective decision making system? Take us there. Take us to that point in your life. How did that all play out?
Right. So I've always been entrepreneurial, an ideas person, very creative. And so I went off to school, became a graphic designer, started my design business. And a few years into it, of running it on my own, after this is kind of post corporate life, I felt like I needed something else to support the business that wasn't just the one-on-one services. I was burning out from one-on-one. So I sat down with my dry erase markers and my sliding glass doors while my husband was working one weekend, and I just kind of dug in with God and through prayer of what my strengths were, my weaknesses, what I was good at and what passionate about. And I felt God leading me to make workbooks for Christian women because I'm really good at breaking things down and systems and kind of problem solving and coming up with the right questions to get to an answer. And at that point, I was like, oh, great. Well, this doesn't just have to be for Christians. Like God was laying on my heart to serve Christians. I was like, this can be for everyone. And I blew up this whole big brand that I tried to make it all about me, wanted to be a big shot, and it flopped. Partly because I had my son and didn't want to be running two businesses at the same time that I was putting so much time and effort into, and it wasn't producing fruit. And so I took a step back from that. So I was still doing the design work, still, had my son at home with me mostly, and still felt at one point God calling me back to making workbooks for Christian women. And I said, all right. Now I had tried other businesses as well. This doesn't get long story very short. I had tried other businesses, had other kind of hobby things going on, and started this big Facebook group for designers that I wanted to monetize at one point, and just kept shutting things down, kept being indecisive. And then also in my personal life, I was so indecisive with even jobs and would get kind of cold feet a day into a job and say, no, I shouldn't have accepted this job. Or we bought our house and I had buyer's regret for our house. Like that's a big decision, big permanent thing. And even my car. And so constantly flip flopping on things, making returns of items that I could return, changing directions. And it was just, I never could find my feet. And it was a waste of time. And once I had kids, I was like, okay. And I had my second son where we jumped back into the story of God calling me back to making these workbooks for Christian women. I was like, God, I can't keep flip flopping my decisions, my direction, my path. I need a solid direction. And so I prayed. I was like, God, I'm not starting this until you give me that solid direction. And I prayed for 6 months at least. And it was over vacation. It was like 3 a.m. I'm sitting there rocking my crying baby back to sleep so he doesn't wake the whole house. We were on vacation with my family. And God hit me. He said, "You're going to make these workbooks to help people make decisions." And I was like, "Okay, God, I am the worst at making decisions. So how can I lead people in this?" And that's when he assured me, "Well, you need this. And there are so many others like you who need this."
Mhm.
And so
Yes.
that's when I set out to study as much as I could about decision making and decision frameworks and processes, and to kind of piece together what was going to be most effective for people who are really overthinkers, as you said, and people who flip flop on their decisions that aren't confident decision makers, because just the basics of a step one. I once listened to a podcast while I was back before I even got into decision making. And this podcast episode was how to make decisions. I was like, great, I need this. So she goes, step one, decide. Step two, commit. Step three, take action. And I'm like, wait, I need help getting to step one.
Yeah,
I can't
yeah.
just decide. So that's when I was like, okay, I need a framework, something that people can follow step by step that works every time, that helps you feel
Mhm.
confident in those decisions.
Oh, it's amazing. Okay, so talk to me about this then. You said you went and studied everything you could about making decisions. Like, what did you find out?
Yeah, so I just put together pages and pages of notes on everything from reading books from priests on making godly decisions, to listening to Andy Stanley's talks and his leadership podcast, to other audiobooks and TED Talks, watching a bunch of TED Talks on people. And so that's when I started to piece together things that made up eventually my SAIL method, and that's SAIL. And that self awareness is that first step of really, you need to know who you are and what you stand for, what your goals and your desires are. And that way you have a foundation to make your decision from. And then the next step is the impacts. How does this impact your life in various ways? And then finally, the litmus test of what is the most important and what's your
Mm.
priority. Because if you don't have the foundation set, then you don't know what your priorities are. And so you kind of have to follow it step by step in order to then make that confident decision of what's best for you. So many times
Mm.
we're influenced by outside pressure, and you end up having regrets or bitterness, and you're not making the best decision for you and or what God has led you to, and prayerfully, or for your family.
So let's put like some a finer point on this a little bit because and I'm just gonna say for myself as a bit and I find a lot of homeschooling moms, a lot of entrepreneurs, we tend to be visionaries when it's like, make a plan, slow down, think it through. My brain starts screaming a little bit. So put some substance around it for the busy brains like mine. You talked about that you have a workbook. We talked offline about how you have a workbook that helps with making decisions regarding what school, what to do about school for your children. So take me through what the sale method looks like in that context, like with an actual decision that we're looking through.
Right. Yes. So my school decision guide helps people, as you said, choose between, homeschool, public school, private school, or let's say, you want to go private school, but you're debating between this one and that one, or these
Mhm,
three. So that self awareness is first, setting that foundation of looking at your circumstances, your personality, your kids' personality, your children's social needs and educational needs. So if they have an IEP that they need a certain type of schooling or help. If your child has dyslexia and they need extra help in reading and that aspect, that's all part of that self awareness foundation. Then also looking at what are your goals for your family, for your education. So, actually, a little shout out to Anna was just on my podcast a while back about helping your kids pick a career path and how Anna helps them with that in their homeschooling. And I love that so much. That is one of your goals for your kids' education. And so, people, if they're really aware, is it to get a sports scholarship? Is it to help them in their career path? Is it to just get your kid to like school so that
mhm.
they'll want to learn? And so, figuring out parts of your children and your personality, things with homeschooling. Honestly, my son, he I don't think would do well under my authority for homeschooling. He listens to everyone else perfectly.
Mhm.
Everywhere he goes, he's getting notes home from school from the music teacher and his teacher saying how well he listens. And yet he does not listen like that for his mama.
Yep.
And it would be a battle daily. And
Mhm.
it would probably stress me out so much that it just would not be a healthy relationship for us. So, figuring those things out and, sometimes there's problem solving you can do to overcome the things that we have fears around, but
Mhm.
overall just get that general picture, that self-awareness. Then the
Sweet.
next one is the I, the impacts. So look at, okay, how does this decision, how does a school decision, for example, impact me, our family, socially, or sorry, not socially. How does this decision for school impact our family financially, relationally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually?
Mm.
So you look at all of those things, then obviously academically, which would usually fall under some of that emotional um, originally. But so you look at the impacts and say, okay, how will spending time apart from each other if my son's at a public school, or how will being together at all times if we're homeschooling affect us, and how does this affect us financially if it's a private school? Those can get really pricey and expensive. How can we handle that? Will we have to cut back in certain areas? What are the ways that this is affecting me and my children and my spouse or even others? There could be effects where if you are helping your elderly parents and one of your decisions is, okay, do we move across the country to take this job offer? That affects your parents and your relationship with them, as well as their support, their health, and their wellness, and whatnot. And then
That's so good.
the final one is the L, your litmus test. So that's when you look at all of the factors involved and start to prioritize them. So if finances are no issue, that doesn't even have to be on your list of things you're comparing. And that's why I think a lot of times pros and cons lists lead people astray because they write down the pro of, oh, homeschooling's cheaper than private school. So that's a pro. But if finances don't matter to your family and you've got plenty of money, or if the grandparents are paying for the kids' schooling, then that might not even be an impacting factor. But maybe the factor of, okay, I want to be the one pouring into my child. If that's the biggest factor, then that goes on that top priority list.
Mm.
And so at that point, you list off everything that's important to you, kind of put it in order of priority. And then you can, even if you want to go one step further, um, plug it into a decision scorecard where it actually gives you a numerical score by multiplying. If you say, okay, finances, that's a 2, that's a 2 ranking of importance. Then you times that by, that's kind of my lowest priority there. Then you times that by, whatever your lowest priority ranking, maybe 10%. But if your time together is the most important, and then you times that by, 70%. So you give it a weight where the most important things are ranked higher, you're given a higher score. So if homeschool to you gives you a 10 in that, times it by that 70%, that gives you a 7. Whereas maybe
Mm.
public school or private school would get a 2 or a 3 in that category, times it by that 70%. So it helps you to really get a picture of what you want. And everybody who completes that litmus test at the end would have a very different score because everybody has different priorities. Even with buying a
Mm.
house, we are down the street from my sister. That was a big priority for us, to be close to family, and ranked really high for us. Our realtor knew we wanted a house close to any of my family members. And for someone else, that could be a complete nightmare. That could be like, give me a 0 for that one. I do not want to be walking distance to any family members' houses. Where,
Oh,
like, my sister and I just walk in each other's houses. We just kind of knock as we're opening the door. So that
aw.
might not be something for everyone, but that was something high up on our priority list.
You know what I really love about this is I think, um So there's a personality type where there's this kind of gut feeling, and when we get the gut feeling, then it's like, "Okay, that's where we go." And that's kind of how I've often started the decision-making process, is there's this sense in the spirit, and then I can kinda look around and weigh everything out, but I can't quantify it for anybody because it's a process that's been birthed out of really 30 years of intimacy with the Lord, where I feel like I've got this knowing. The challenge, though, is when I make a decision that way, I kind of fall in love with the decision for reasons that I can't describe, and so when challenges come, then it's like, "Wait a second, like, this was the one, this was the decision, it's supposed to be great," and so even though I've matured to a point now where I expect there's gonna be road bumps along the way, but nonetheless, I think that what I love about this practice is there's a very concrete representation of the fact that there are 2 sides to every coin, and so maybe I recognize walking in, if I buy a house that's just down the street from my sister, that also means that we may not have as much, like, flexibility around the floor plan that we end up with because it's all in this little neighborhood, and so there's gonna be the dishwasher where I don't want it or the master's up instead of down, and we walk in eyes wide open, having weighed the full measure so that when challenges arise and we're like, "I hate this piece of I hate that the backyard is only the size of a postage stamp," or, "I can't believe this," we're still anchored in this very concrete metric of, "Yep, that's not my favorite, but 70% weight towards being with family." So I love that. Like, so as you've gone through this process, as you've led other people through this process, how has having this process shifted things for them on the back end after the decision was already made?
Right. Yeah. So I love that you bring this up because I do encourage people to write down those reasons after they've gone through it, because anyone who's fickle in their decision making knows that you tend to go back and say, "Wait, why did I buy this house in this
Mhm.
neighborhood, or this, but hey, I've been living down the street from my sister for years." So, yeah, sometimes people they'll look at their decision, and when outside people start to question why they made that decision, or when they start questioning it themselves and freaking out, because sometimes it's a heart versus a head or even versus your gut issue, where you're wondering like, wait, my gut instinct said no, but my heart said yes, and so now what? But when you have this concrete decision made and you've got the reasons listed out, and you can remind yourself of that, like literally write it down, that way, you can go back and give yourself that assurance that, yes, this was the best choice for you. And our decisions can change. So there are times that you might make a decision for what's best for you now, and that could totally change. Even with me with schooling, I actually pray after having our conversation and the recording that we did, about helping your kids find their path and their purpose, and just hearing your homeschool journey. I pray that one day my son will be in a position that he will listen from me and take my instruction from home, and we could have that homeschool journey. And I think it would be a beautiful thing. And down the road, that might be the right decision for us. Right now, he's in the public school. It's a great situation, and so we're happy with our decision right now. And,
Mhm.
things can change. You could end up not liking a decision you make too. You could move in down the street from your sister and then, have some sort of issue with the spouses that are like, "Okay, we need a little more privacy. Can't just have your sister walking in our house." So, keep that in mind too, but then you still have those concrete things to go back to say, "But wait, family is
Mhm.
important to us." So you could then that's when you problem solve and say, "All right, let's not just walk into each other's houses. Maybe we need to knock or text ahead of time that like, 'Hey, can I swing by?'" So yeah, just find ways to problem solve around what you've realized you actually want.
That's so good. Okay, so with the self-awareness, and you brought up something interesting. You talked about when you were talking about, do we homeschool? Do we send to public school? What's that decision? And you said sometimes we may have like judgments or fears that are part of our weighing process. So how do we know whether it's time to whether it's time to press against that presupposition or that fear, or whether it's time to say, we're just gonna that we're gonna assume that this is true even if it doesn't always have to be true. Like, how do we know which way to go with something like that? Like, it's
Yeah.
a preconceived notion.
Right. The first thing is always to pray and ask for clarity because sometimes we don't know, is this something from God kind of to put a boundary there for me? Or is this the devil trying to keep me from something good? Or is this just me being confused, being human, not knowing?
Mhm.
And then actually, I have a whole podcast episode on how to put your thoughts on trial to
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. Yeah,
to
yeah.
figure out what's truth and what's not. So you want to do it just like an actual trial of innocent until proven guilty. So kind of this fear that we have, okay, if it hasn't actually happened and it's not truth, we can't deem it as if it's truth. We can't let it affect us. And so look at what are the actual probabilities of this scenario working out the way we thought it is? Or how can we actually test it out first? So if you're afraid that homeschooling's not going to work because your son's just not going to listen, test it out. Try doing school from home from over summer or spring break or whenever, even on weekends, and just give it a test. Give it enough of a test that it's not like, oh, one time tried that, didn't work. But give it some time, give it a chance. Talk with other people who have been in that situation and who have similar situations of themselves. So many times you see people posting questions. I'm in, Facebook groups of like Christian moms and whatnot. And they're like, hey, even which homeschool curriculum should I use? Or should I send my kid to public school as a Christian? And, should I move next to my sister? And if without context, these people can't really give you a good enough judgment. And, you could have this fear over, I can't think of an example, but you could have these fears when your kid is completely different than someone else's kid. And, you could have a situation where you and your sister's dynamic is very different than me and my sister's dynamic. So some people might think like, oh, it worked for Lauren, let me try that. And it might not work out for someone else. So, making sure you give context when you are talking with people. And, I have a friend who her daughter is dyslexic and needed very specific help. And she wanted to send her to a private Christian school. And she sent her first to a private Christian school that our other friend had her kids in and loved. But their reading program and the way they teach reading at that school was not set up for kids with dyslexia. And so, even though our one friend loves that school, raves about it, her three kids are all there, it's not a good fit for the other friend whose child needs a different situation.
Oh, those Facebook questions, "Which should I use? What do you like?" drive me bananas. I'm like, "Why do you think they're gonna know what you need?"
Right. Yeah. That is not the place to go asking big life altering questions.
Yes, yes. I mean, we've got a couple groups here where I live where it's like, "What should I do about my marriage?" And I'm like, "Y'all, okay." Like,
Yep. There are certain
we've lost
situations
our
that,
way.
yeah, you need to seek the experts. You need more than, I think people just want some validation almost that they
Mhm.
already
Yep.
know a direction, or they're just so lost and confused in their brain that they think that that'll be the solution, that all of a sudden
Yep.
the sky will light up and the dove will come down and ascend on. Yes, you take this path and direction.
Yes. Yes. Okay, friend, I've got an invitation for you. As a woman of faith looking to serve God and walk in her calling powerfully, it's important that you feel good. And for me, my body completely shifted when I started taking high quality supplements that were really working with me in balancing hormones, healing my gut, and overall just helping me feel better in my own skin. If you're curious, Modere, the company that I've partnered with, is actually offering their best specials this month. So shoot me a message, find me on social media, and let's get you connected with that tool that's going to serve you so you can serve others. And I kind of put my life coaching hat on. And here's the question I ask in those contexts. And I would love to hear either how this fits within your framework or what you would add. So the question that I tend to ask, because I'll like comment on these threads, right? Because I want there to be someone in there that's not just like, do this, do this, do this, do this. And then they're just spinning their wheels and going, okay, well, like which came up? Because I feel like this is kind of our elementary school solution. Which response had more to it? Like who responded more with X versus Y? And it's like, that's irrelevant, right? That's irrelevant in making our decisions ultimately. But what I'll often ask is, if money or resources were not a factor, and if fear, judgment, and like, uh, self-criticism, like, what's gonna happen? What could I do if I can't do? I'm not able to. I'm afraid. What if it doesn't? If all of that and judgments, if they all got a back seat, they did not get a voice at the table, what would you decide? So calling forth that highest and best self where and then once we do that, then we can look at resources and all of that. So I feel like I wonder it feels is what would you add to that? What else needs to be in the mix for it to be a sale process?
Yeah, so that would fall under that emotional impact category, under the I
Mhm.
in sale. And yeah, I have some of those questions in my guide of if money was no issue, what would you choose? Or if other people's opinions were set aside and what do you actually really want? And you have to look at the long term too, and not just short term. Sometimes we give up what we want most for what we want now.
Oh, oh my gosh. That's it. Yes, yes. Sometimes we give up what we want most for what we want now. Mm. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, right here now, we might like right now, okay, I'm going through a home renovation. What we want most is a beautiful home that we can entertain, have family over. I'm one of 5 kids. When we're all together with all the grandkids and everybody, there's 20 of us and it's only growing. So, we need a space that we can host our family and have people over. But in the process, like if you ask me right now what we want, I'd be like, oh, this renovation is horrible. It's no fun. I'm sitting in my foyer right now with both like my son's bed in front of me, the living room furniture. We've got foyer furniture, like my husband's desk over there. It's all crammed together. I lived in my living room for a week. My closet was in my living room for a week. It's a disaster in our house. There's dust everywhere, but the end product is worth it. But you have to be willing to give up peace and comfort. And especially for us, financially, we couldn't afford to just hire everything out and hire one contractor that covers everything. So we're kind of piecemealing it together. We are helping with these projects. We're getting our hands dirty. And that means it's taking a lot longer. And it's a strain on our time and our energy, but in the end, it's worth it. So you can't just look at the here and now and say, nope, it's too much work. We're not going to go through with the renovations when our end goal, we have to put up with the chaos right now in order to get that. Or even things I think about, we have always been had this tension of do we try for a girl. We have 2 boys. I've always wanted a girl. That's one of the decisions that I created these guides for, my general decision guide. I used that decision as my framework that, okay, if I, the most indecisive person ever, can come up with a solid answer to this struggle, then I know that this framework works. And but even then, I still sometimes get in this battle of, okay, we've laid it out that it's best for our family to stop at 2, at least in this time. And sometimes I shudder thinking of like, oh, I don't want to go through the baby phase again. And then I start thinking, am I giving up this long-term dream of mine to have a daughter, to have that relationship because I don't want to go through a baby phase, because I don't want to deal with toddler tantrums and nursing and having no freedom basically for when they're newborns and just all of the stress of bringing in another child. So am I giving that up the short term because
Mm.
am I giving that up in the long term because of wanting this peace and comfort in the short term?
Mm. That's so good. And what I love about that is, we are limited, right? We cannot do everything. And so it's important that we recognize like what are the true calls, what are the true heart's passions. We can't have every dream. So what are the dreams that we feel ushered into? We had a season in our life where I felt this invitation to more children and my husband was like, I don't feel that. I don't feel like we're there anymore. And one thing that he said and it was a hard wrestling because we really were on different sides of the conversation, but one of the things that was such a gift to me that he said is, yeah, like, yes, we expand, yes, we make room, yes, if we do get pregnant, like, then obviously that's God's will and that's a huge blessing, but let's just be aware that we are limited beings, and although we can expand and stretch into new spaces and there becomes more of us, there's a greater capacity. I think as we grow, we don't fit in the same vessel. God expands our vessel to be able to do more, to have more, to be more. But that said, we also need to be reflecting on what are we no longer able to do if we say yes to this other thing. And so I love how you said that, and I love what you said about, there's a beautiful book called The Next Right Thing by Emily P. something. I forget her last name, but have you read that one?
Yes. Is it Emily Freeman?
That's it, Emily P.
Yes.
Freeman.
Yes.
And she says, "What do you want?" And then she says, "What do you want more?" And if we don't do the work that you're talking about on the front end, then we can miss the more, because the more is almost always a longer term horizon and it is only available to us by struggle. So I love what you said about, like, if I just look at the home renovation in the short term, I want it to be over. Like, I want it done. That's what I want. But what do I want more? I want the space that we've envisioned, and that's going to require more heartache and more energy and more effort, blood, sweat, and tears, and furniture in the foyer and all of it. So, oh, that's so good.
Yeah,
We're
actually,
gonna
that book was one that I read as part of my research, and she had this other quote that helped shape the self-awareness section of the sale method that was, "Who are you? And in lieu of who you are, what do you want?"
ooh,
And so that's just, yeah, you need to know who you are and what you stand for, your values, your non-negotiables, in order
mm,
to even know what you want. Because we can get torn. Our heart and our mind can be in battle of, oh, I don't want to deal with the toddler stage again and the newborn stage again. And I don't want to deal with the logistics of having to drive 3 kids around to all different activities and have my finances stretched thin. And then there's the heart that's saying, "But, oh, you've always wanted a girl. You want that daughter, and, wouldn't it be beautiful?" And so,
mhm. Yes, that's so good. And there it comes again, like, what are the things that they just are the way they are, and what are the things that can shift in time, right? In ways that we can't even know or recognize, and I think that's why it's what you said is so important, that we start each of these conversations in prayer. You just
yeah.
go, "Okay, Lord, just show me." Mm,
Yeah, because
okay.
he can overrule anything. You could go through the whole sale method and come up with what you want, but if God is pointing you in a different direction, then that's the path you need to take, because ultimately his rule, his design, his ideas are so much better than ours.
Mhm. That's so true. So, to that end, I just wanna close with this question, okay? So, we've made the decision, we start walking in the decision. How do we know when it's time to edit from there?
I think if things come up. So if you start walking in that decision, and let's say it is picking a homeschool, choosing to homeschool, and you start your homeschool journey and your children are not listening to you. And it's a battle every day to get them to do their schoolwork, even just the basics of it. And then your mental health starts taking a downfall because you're now stressed about not doing a good enough job. You start feeling like a failure. And so at that point, you can evaluate, was this really the best direction, or is this just a trial? And should we pivot, or should we problem solve and come up with a better way? And I think that's a big thing with decisions. That part of my past, I used to be the type that would throw in the towel as soon as things got hard, instead of problem solving and saying, how could we try this a different way?
Mm,
So, yeah, when those red flags come up, when those bumps in the road, sometimes it's either God giving us a few trials to give us the strength, to show us that it's not in our abilities, it's in His strength that He wants that for us. And we have to learn how to depend on Him to overcome. Sometimes it could be pushback from the devil. He could not want you to take that path. He does not want you to homeschool your kids, or whatever the option is. He might not want you to live down the street from your sister. He might not want you to, take that job or have that next baby. And so you have to kind of evaluate, where is this coming from, and what are those next steps? What battles
mm,
and obstacles do I need to overcome? What does the Bible say about this? And, have I listened for God? Because we can pray about it all we want, but if you don't actually stop and listen, and certain bigger decisions, life impacting decisions, do some fasting, stay in prayer for days. Like, Don't just make it a 5-second prayer when you wake up in the morning and then you're on your way. Like, actually dive in and read into scripture and talk with those who are wise counsel and pastors and, shepherds in your life to figure out
Mm.
what's next.
I love that. And I found this really fun to hear you kind of talking about the homeschool decision and what about when your kids don't listen because, um, when we started homeschooling, all the mentors that I had in my life and the authors that I would read and things like that, homeschool looked a lot, at least from my external view, like sitting on a blanket in the middle of a field reading a read aloud while the kids placidly were weaving daisy chains and just loving every minute. And our school was a lot more like a battlefield. We had a neurodivergent kid who was wreaking havoc. We had a lot of crazy behavior going on in the background, and it was just I had one studious kid, my firstborn, would just sit and listen and do whatever she was asked, and then everybody else was just tearing down the wallpaper everywhere. And so, um, if I made the decision sometimes I would have these conversations with my husband, and he'd be like, "Well, just send him to school." And I was like, hold on. Hang with me in the messy middle so that we can really decide whether this is a sanctifying process that all of us need to go through, whether this is a season, whether this is just like pushback because they know the door is always open and we haven't really decided and committed to this thing. And so, because, and without realizing it, we had that self awareness piece because we knew what we wanted more, right? What we wanted as far as time together, what we wanted as far as the ability to have a significant amount of space in our day to gift our children what the Lord had given us as far as like the relationship with Him and knowledge about business and finance and learning how to be healthy in relationship with one another, which the Lord had done a huge work in my life along those lines. We knew what we wanted more, and so it kept us oriented to shoot beyond the present day hassle and stay in the trenches. But that said, there was a constant reevaluation. How can we do this differently? How can this shift a little bit? And some of it was conversations that my husband would have with my son about respect, because I think one of the dynamics that's oh so fun is mamas and boys, boys know that they're little men. And so there's this little thing wired in them that's like, but she's a girl. You don't have to listen to her. She's a girl. And so we had some of those conversations. We did a lot of different process conversations. We got outside help. And so like all of this resonates so much with my spirit, but I love that you've quantified it for us where you're like, this is the path. Because I think the Holy Spirit kind of takes us along the journey for over the multiple decades that we serve God, where we come to know the path, right? Of like, oh, I need to listen, I need to have obedience, I need to make sure I know myself and I know God's work in me. And then I start to look at, okay, how would this play out? What's my scorecard? And then I need to test it. We kind of recognize that intuitively, but what a gift to people who aren't decades into this thing to go, okay, here's how you lay it out. And so then you have quantified for us, Lauren, something that we come to learn in time through the Lord's shaping and refining, but we need it now, right? We need it right now, even while we're baby Christians or even while we're facing this one life altering decision. So I just think the work that you're doing is so beautiful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanna make sure that my people know how they can connect with you. So tell us how to find you, and then tell us also I wanna hear about this compass that you mentioned when we were talking beforehand.
Yes. So you can find me at anchoreddecisions.com, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Anchored Decisions. And then I have this freebie that it's called your decision compass. And it's basically to help you go through that self-awareness piece of pointing you in the direction that you want to go based on who you are, your core values, your mission, your goals, in order to kind of set the lens from which you make all of your decisions. And you can find that at anchoreddecisions.com/compass.
Beautiful. Lauren, thank you so much. Any final word of encouragement that you wanna offer my people as they step into this season or these seasons that they will face where they have to make a big decision?
Yeah, I'd say to not be afraid of change and of the future, because that is one of the biggest things that holds people back in decision making is they're afraid of making the wrong choice. So go about it in prayer, Take these steps through the SAIL method to help you feel confident and move forward and be able to take action.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lauren. I appreciate you being here. And thank you to my listeners for hanging in with me. And I cannot wait for us to connect next time. Until then, you've got this because he's got you. Friend, thank you so much for listening to this most recent episode of Overwhelmed to Overcomer. So, listen, the whole idea behind this mission is that when we endeavor to be brave with our lives, we need to do it together. Belonging is key. So if you resonated with the message from this episode, share it with a friend. Do it together. Thank you again. And until next time, never forget, you've got this because he's got you.